This morning, the morning pledge will be said by Ariani Marmolejo, from Coronado Hills Elementary School in Littleton, Colorado, guest of Representative Caraveo.
May you join the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all. Mr. Randall, please call the roll. So it's Ariani?
Representatives Arndt, Baisley, Beckman, Benavides, Bird, Bockenfeld, Buckner, Wentale, Caraveo, Carver, Catlin, excused, Coleman, Cutter, Duran,
Excused.
Escar, Exum, Froelich, Garnett,
Excused.
Geithner, Gonzalez Gutierrez,
Do you
Gray,
have a script?
Hanson, Harrod,
Excused. Oh, is she here? Okay.
Holtorf, Putin, Humphrey, Jackson. Representative Garnett is present. Jackson.
Excused.
Harquez Lewis.
She's going to do the resolution, not the memorial.
Harquez Lewis.
Okay. Excused.
Kennedy. Kip.
Excused.
Kraftharp. Landgraf. Larson. Liston. Lontine. McCluskey. McKean. McLaughlin excused. Melton.
Excused.
Michelson Janae. Mullica. Neville. Pelton. Ransom. Rich. Roberts. Representative Kipp is present. Sane. Sandridge. Singer. Sirota. Snyder. Soper. Sullivan. Tipper. Titone. Valdez A. Valdez. Valdez D. Van Winkle. Van Winkle. Representative Jackson is present. Weissman. Williams. Wilson. Good morning. Young. Madam Speaker.
$60 and
65 present. It can't. Oh. With 60 present and 5 excused, we have a quorum. Representative Young.
Madam Speaker, I need permission to use a visual aid with my motion. I move that the Journal of Thursday, January 16th, 2020 be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion passes. Announcements and introductions. Representative Gray. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Gray. Can you hold on just a second? Do you want to go first? Okay. Representative Beckman. Members, it's a little loud. Can everyone please be quiet?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is an honor to serve with you.
It's an honor to serve with you.
I'm asking for just a moment to make an announcement, please. Wow. I have a letter that I'm going to submit to Chief Clerk Robin Jones after I say a few words, and so I'd like to read the letter. Dear Chief Clerk Robin Jones, I write this letter to formally tender my resignation from the Colorado House of Representatives as the House District 38 representative, effective immediately upon the acceptance of this letter. I'm resigning to accept a position in the Trump administration. In this role, I will continue to serve Colorado, and I'll actually be just down the street. I will always be grateful to have had this opportunity to serve the good people in House District 38 in this beautiful, magnificent building. I will always be thankful for the support of my family throughout my 18 years as an elected official. To all the nonpartisan staff, every one of you, the Sergeant of Arms, my caucus staff, my caucus leadership, my caucus colleagues, and all representatives that sit in this chamber, I want you to know that it has been an honor and a privilege to work with you. I wish you peace and prosperity, nothing without providence, nothing without God. With respect, Representative Susan Beckman.
Now, Representative Gray.
Thank you, members. And while I still have your attention, I want to let you guys know that one of our members had a profound lapse in judgment last night that I think we need to address. We've all been in that place before. We're out in the evening. We wind up hanging out with the wrong crowd, and we make decisions that we're not proud of. Last night, Representative Hanson, went out in the evening. He wound up hanging out with this group of people, and it turns out they were a Senate vacancy committee. And lo and behold, he made some very poor choices on the evening and was appointed to be the next state senator for the state of Colorado. So let's all join in booing him for making bad choices and also probably congratulating him on his accomplishment, Senator-elect Hanson.
Any other announcements about people leaving the chamber before we? All right, Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm certainly hoping that our chief clerk hasn't received that letter yet, because I believe Representative Beckman's still in the well, and I'd hate to have her let out. But in all seriousness,
Hold on, Representative Singer. Members, it's exciting news this morning. It would be helpful if the members who want to talk to the departing members take their conversations to the side and out of the well so that we can continue on with announcements.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Godspeed, Representative Beckman, and may God have mercy on your soul, Representative Hansen. For those of you excited about what we do at the Colorado Channel Advisory Board will be meeting today at 11 a.m. up in Senate Committee Room, I believe 352. You're more than welcome to join us, and we look forward to a great, robust conversation. We'll hopefully see some of you there. Have a great Friday.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It never ceases to amaze me the extent that some of our members will go to avoid supporting the kids in the National Junior Livestock Sale, 2 of them leaving the chamber. But I just wanted you to know I've got another $250 check for my membership to the Cowgirl and Cowboy Caucus. So the Republican side of the aisle is really putting it on the left-hand side, so just saying.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Speaker. Members on judiciary and others interested, final reminder that we will have a joint judiciary meeting with JBC to discuss matters of joint interest concerning prison capacity and public safety at noon today in 271, now called the Old State Library, just over that way. If you're getting tired of hearing me say this, it probably just means I'm doing my job as chair. One new thing is that everybody should have, via email from Lauren Larson with OSPB yesterday, a 20-plus page detailed document from the Budget Office setting forth in detail the proposal of the Department of Corrections to respond to the situation that we are called upon to respond to. If you have not already seen that, please review your email. Try to give it a look before noon. I expect we'll go into it in detail. For some reason you don't have it via an email glitch, I will forward it to you. Come find me. Thank you.
Do you know what, Representative Michelson, Janae, I'm just going to put us in a brief recess so that folks can continue to talk to Representative Beckman. I think that's probably a better way to give everyone time to talk to her and not intrude on announcements and introductions. So we'll be in a brief recess. Okay. The House will come back to order. Now we will continue with announcements and introductions. Representative, is it Michelson Janae? Where'd you go?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I know it's an exciting day, but I'm going to ask for you to take a look at what is on your desk from Children's Hospital today, please. Children's Hospital is in my district, and sometimes we think of children's hospitals as hospitals for short people, but it's not just hospitals for short people. Our children require very different medicine and treatment than our adult people require. And I am very grateful that Children's Hospital is in my district. I am a Children's Hospital parent. So please take a look at what Children's Hospital has put in front of you. And I will be supporting legislation to help our children, as I always do. And I invite you to join me. Take a look, please. Thank you.
Any other? Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I apologize for taking 2 times up here. But while you called the recess, I happened to receive another check from the right side of the chamber for the junior livestock sale. So, Representative Arndt, get after it.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and perhaps the last time I get to say that.
I'm actually going to be Madam Speaker for a while longer, so you do get to say it. You just don't get to say it from the well right there.
Yeah, perhaps
Yes.
in this spot. Colleagues, friends, this all came about very suddenly.
Hold on,
very
Representative
quickly.
Hansen. Members, could we have it quiet in the chamber? Thank you.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that, Madam Speaker, and my friends, my colleagues. Today, in a somewhat unexpected fashion, I unfortunately am bidding you goodbye from this chamber. I have been here for about 3.5 years, have enjoyed each day so much, have enjoyed the work with you, the problem solving, the puzzles that we get to encounter day after day on behalf of the people of Colorado. And I leave in a sort of a bittersweet moment of reflection. I am excited to continue this work with you just down the hall. I won't go far, and I know really wonderful things are ahead this session and into the future. So thank you for your love and support as we have been on this journey together. We've tackled some really tough things at times. There have been some very wonderful days in this chamber. There's been some really tough days in this chamber. Emotional days in this chamber, and I'm so glad to have had that part of the journey with each of you. So I leave with a thank you and gratitude, and I can't wait to continue this work together in this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hansen. You have served this chamber well, and we will miss you, and we give you our condolences. Any other announcements and introductions? Seeing none. Oh, one more. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Reminder, Crime Victims Caucus, Tuesday at noon to 1. We're going to be looking at current crime trends in Colorado, and the speaker will be District Attorney Doherty from Boulder. Hope to see you there, room 354.
All right. Now moving on to our next order of business, that is consideration of memorials. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Memorial 1001. And members, please stand for
House Memorial 1001 by Representative Valdez A., memorializing former Representative Wayne Knox.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move for the adoption of House Memorial 1001 and request that it be read at length.
Mr. Randall, please read the memorial at length.
Whereas our respected former colleague, Wayne Knox, the longest-serving member of the House of Representatives, departed this life on January 21st, 2019, at the age of 92. And whereas Representative Knox was a Denver native, and he served in the United States Army after high school before attending the University of Denver and the University of Colorado. And whereas, for 33 years, Representative Knox taught high school social studies in Commerce City. And whereas Representative Knox was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives 16 times and served for 32 years, making him the longest-serving state representative in Colorado history. And whereas, during his time in the State House, Representative Knox served on a number of committees, including the Education, Finance, State Affairs, and Judiciary Committees, and he served as chair of the Education Committee and Finance Committee at points during his tenure. And whereas Representative Knox may be most remembered under the Gold Dome for his work in passing the gavel, give a vote to every legislator amendment. And whereas, passed in 1988, gavel prohibits pocket vetoes of bills by committee chairs and requires that each bill brought before the House of Representatives or the Senate to have a hearing and a vote. And whereas, after Representative Knox retired from the legislature in 1996, he spent time serving with various political and nonprofit organizations, including the Colorado League of Women Voters and the Colorado Senior Lobby. And whereas fellow politicians remember Representative Knox as being a hardworking and conscientious public servant and for being dedicated and sincere. And whereas Representative Knox loved Colorado and enjoyed taking his 2 daughters for trips to the mountains, and he was a fan of folk music, including Peter, Paul, and Mary, and he was a caring father and caring grandfather. And whereas Representative Knox was a devoted public servant who was well respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle and will be remembered for his hard work, dedication, and accomplishments. Now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado that in the death of Wayne Knox, the people of the state of Colorado have lost a dedicated public servant and an outstanding citizen, and that we, the members of the Colorado House of Representatives, do hereby extend our deep and heartfelt sympathy to the members of his family and pay tribute to a man who served his state well and faithfully. Be it further resolved that copies of this memorial be sent to his daughters, Laura Vossel and Elizabeth Knox, and his grandson, Josh Vossel.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to say a few words about Representative Knox. He was here before my time, obviously, but he's going to hold a record in this chamber forever. The longest-serving member here in the House of Representatives in the state of Colorado, one that most likely will never be broken. There's probably no more Denver of a person who ever served in this chamber. A graduate of DPS, a Denver native. He was an education lover. He served as a teacher of social studies for 33 years in Adams County and Commerce City, so we know that. We all owe him a great debt of gratitude. Representative Knox is the reason that we have the ability to introduce 5 bills and have them heard. And I think that when you look at other legislatures around this nation and their lack of gavel and how those bodies work, I think we should all be very thankful for Representative Knox's service and his work in getting gavel passed. He was said to have a very trademark way of approaching the well, very slowly, that a lot of members remember most about him. He would slowly approach the well to give his speeches. And he was always looking out for the working man. He really cared about the working people of Colorado. He was passionate. We talked about his love of folk music, but he was a family man, and he loved to take his family to the mountains, and I'm sure they miss him very much. He was a very gentle and understated man, and he had a cat named Buddy who ran the house. So I think when we look back on his life and his service to our state and his service to this chamber, every time you have a bill read in committee, let's not forget that it was Representative Knox who made that possible for all of us. So thank you very much.
Do you want to make a motion under Rule 26?
Yeah. So are there any members that wish to speak?
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to speak today because I had the chance to get to know Representative Knox. He was a constituent of mine during the last years of his life. He lived in an assisted living facility near Colorado Boulevard and Alameda. During my campaign, one of the constituents I stopped to knock on their door asked me if I'd ever met Wayne Knox. And I said, no, I haven't. And they told me a little bit about his history and the Gavel Amendment and some of the things that we just heard. And that constituent then immediately put me in touch with Wayne. I went to visit him at his apartment on the top floor of this facility. At that point, he was definitely was dealing with several medical issues, had to use oxygen for most of the day, but still very sharp, was up on the news, knew everything that was going on. And I got a chance to sit with him for about an hour. And we had a cup of tea and had a chance to talk about the issues of the day, what was going on in the legislature, what were the top things that were going to come up next session. So engaged, such a careful listener, such a deliberative man. And he told me a little bit about his time when he was in the building. And as we started to wrap up our conversation, he thanked me for running, because he had been through, and you can see just from the dates on your desk, he was in the House and then was beaten in the election, then came back and then got beat again in the 72 election, which was not a great election for Democrats. Turns out he got back in on an election that was pretty good for the Democrats. But this was back in the day when Denver districts were amalgamated and it was a list. And you just needed to be like in the top 17. I think that was the cutoff point he told me about. In one of his first elections, he ended up 16th on the list and beat the 18th person by like 6 votes or something. Some very narrow margin. So it was a very different setup to what we're used to today. But he loved this state. He loved this chamber. He handed me a $40 check as I left that day. And it was one of the most precious gifts I was given during my campaign to get that vote of confidence from Representative Knox. And so I join today with you as my colleagues, remembering him, remembering what he gave to this body. Whether you're majority or minority, every single bill gets heard. And that is a big piece of his legacy. Thank you, Representative Knox.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is a tremendous accomplishment. So talking a little bit more about what Representative Knox did for all of us. Prior to the Gavel Amendment, this chamber, in the Senate chamber, operated much like the House of Representatives, like Congress did, which means that a chair had a pocket veto. And due to the work of Representative Knox, every single legislator here, whether you're in the majority or the minority, gets an opportunity to have their bill heard, which means everybody in the state of Colorado, their representative has a chance to get that issue heard in a public hearing, and therefore the public has an opportunity to react to that legislation in favor or against it. I think that's just a really tremendous. It changed party politics forever. And so just a little bit more recognition on that amazing accomplishment. I think we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to Representative Knox. Thank you.
Are there any other members who'd like to speak? Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to recognize 3 former elected officials that are in the chamber with us today. Representative Wilma Webb, Representative Linkhart, and Representative Coleman. And
Representative Valdez.
Madam Speaker, under Rule 26, I request a recess to allow for the former members to speak.
The House will be in recess so former members can speak. Whoever wants to come down first. Representative Webb.
Good morning, Madam Speaker Becker, and to all of the members of this illustrious body, for which I'm very proud to say that I was a member for 13 years, and it was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life, and I will always cherish it. I am honored to pay tribute and respect to the Honorable Wayne N. Knox, Colorado State Representative, who will always be remembered by those who knew him best, his daughters Laurel and Lisa, and his grandson Joshua, and his son Mark, and all his family, and by those whom he served, those who he served with, and as a genuine statesman who always kept his word and who always looked out for ordinary people. He was an humble and strong-willed servant of the people. The people could count on Wayne when it really mattered concerning issues of everyday living. He never forgot who put him in the Colorado House of Representatives, where he responded to our teachers in our state concerning their issues and where he worked to ensure Coloradoans easier access to their government, listening to their concerns. He was a leader who protected our most valuable assets, our children, by being in the forefront of an education system which met the educational needs of all of our children. He was a mentor's mentor, where he offered guidance to any and all members of this body, the knowledge that he received during his service of longevity to Colorado. He was a true friend, always lending an ear to try to solve problems by being there when you needed him. He lived out what he believed in and what he valued. He gently guided those of us who looked up to him for his wisdom. His words and deeds were reflected in how he lived his life, which was one of good character, benevolence, empathy, and trust, unto his final transition from this earth. He was one of the deans, if not the dean, of the General Assembly. He served over the years in the Colorado House, where his peers knew that he was a voice for not only the people who elected him, but more so for the ideals for what all of Colorado's citizens could aspire to become. He wanted so much for all of us to have opportunity to realize the American dream. He fought for better education for all of Colorado's students. He was a master teacher of the Colorado School Finance Act. He was a protector of the better aspects of the funding formula, and he would fight tooth and nail to remove what he regarded to be unfair in the distribution of education funds. He was our democratic leader on education from K through 12 through higher education. As a teacher by profession, he knew the value of education as a life asset which made life better for people. I, as a member of the Education Committee, along with Wayne, was a witness to his commitment to our being compelled to delivering the best education system that was possible and fighting for it with all that he had. Wayne Knox was courageous and true to his word on every occasion that he gave it. He fought for justice even after being defeated time after time on proposed bills and amendments that could have added a better quality of life to the poor, to the mentally ill, to those who were undervalued and repressed, and voters whose voice needed to be heard in laws which were being considered and laws that should have been heard and adopted to make a more perfect state and union. Wayne, a quiet man by nature, supported me in every time that I asked him to, even on uncomfortable issues, whether it was a bill for civil rights for every citizen, the liberation of political prisoner Nelson Mandela, and the abolition of apartheid, equal rights for those who had a different sexual orientation, full-day kindergarten, or funding for the mentally ill, and so many other issues which over a period of time have been shown to be efforts which have made us a better state, nation, and world. I will be forever grateful to Wayne Knox for what he stood for and his, and I quote, "I will not be moved from what I know to be right" stance and support for trying to make this world a better place. Wayne was a friend that everyone was fortunate to have. He was a friend to me, and I was blessed for his friendship. I will always be indebted to Wayne Knox for his friendship to me in so many ways. Wellington and I are also grateful to Wayne for taking a chance on what had never been done before. When Wellington E. Webb walked his famous walk where he, and I also, stayed in homes throughout Denver, Wayne opened up his house to us for one night for us to stay there as we campaigned and walked across the city. Thanks to Wayne Knox for being one who had faith that Wellington Webb would be elected as the 42nd mayor and be the first African-American mayor of Denver and do a remarkable service in that office of the people. We will never forget Wayne N. Knox for the confidence he had in something that many believed never would happen, yet it did, thanks to Wayne and others who believed. Wayne's heroes, and I know because I sat next to him in our offices across the hallway, were President John F. Kennedy and Vice President Walter Mondale. Wayne loved politics and being engaged as a delegate and a participant of the many political conventions which were convened here in Colorado and across the nation to elect our elected officials near and afar. His dedication to democracy was unequaled and stood out as a beacon of illumination for those who needed encouragement that our democratic republic can work for all Americans. So many of us wish that Wayne N. Knox were here today to help solve some of the most trying issues of all times. However, the time has come that all of us have to execute more of what Colorado State Representative Wayne N. Knox bequeathed to us: good character, courage, the will to make a positive difference for something bigger than ourselves. Such was the statesman Wayne N. Knox. If you would allow me to, I would like for us to express extreme gratitude, admiration, and respect from all of the people of Colorado, all of the elected officials who are serving now in any office, or who served along with the Honorable Colorado State Representative Wayne N. Knox during his tenure of longevity in this chamber. Can we all please stand and give an honorable moment of silent reflection to the Honorable Colorado State Representative Wayne N. Knox. Thank you very much.
Representative Coleman.
I'm so glad this is made up for short people like me. I'm honored to come and talk about my friend Wayne Knox, Representative Wayne Knox. I initially became acquainted, and he eventually became my mentor in politics way back in the early 80s. My son, who was a young Democrat, wanted to arrive to go to a caucus, and I, meanwhile, was trying to build a Catholic church, which was our church. We were trying to raise thousands of dollars, mostly by raising bingo funds, and I was the president, and so I had to go to that meeting because we had to decide whether we were going to. And so he said, "Mom, I need a ride to the caucus." I says, "What's a caucus?" Well, needless to say, sometimes your children teach you more than you know. But it was all of my volunteer work in the church that helped me become the Democrat and then the public servant. And it was people like Wayne Knox that finally did teach me the ropes and taught me what it was like and how you needed to earn your stripes in your party in order to run and to be a valuable and credible candidate. One of the first things I remember about Wayne when I got into politics, which was rather overwhelming to me, was all these people talking about issues. It was, really important issues that normally I wouldn't talk about. But they put House District 1 and House District 3 together, and he was representing 3, and he always showed up for every meeting. And that's the one thing that I always tried to emulate once I became a state representative, is to be like him, to be attentive, to come to those meetings, how important it was to report back to your constituency and let them know what was going on. The neat thing about Wayne is he never stopped learning. He never stopped being aware. He never stopped teaching. And Senator Doug Linkhart and I, and also Representative Mike Serbo, had the honor of having breakfast with Wayne about a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago. We had breakfast with him over the Sunrise. And he was so sharp. He was mostly ahead of us on the topics from federal, state to local. And the other cool thing about him is, because, you know, he was always a trim man, a slight man. But boy, the breakfast that he ordered, he just kept ordering, and, you know, and we were all done with eating, and he was calling the person over to order some more toast, to order his eggs just so. And it was just really cool to see that side of Wayne, because all of those years that I'd known Wayne, I really had never really sat down to have a meal with him. So we were too busy, you know, doing politics. But on a personal side, what I really want to share with you is his work. His longtime work, and how he never gave up, even when he was in the minority, especially around civil rights. I come from a migrant family. Our family migrated and did the crops. I was a field worker. I actually used a short-handled hoe. And Wayne was some of those people, he was one of those people that worked on civil rights to make the equity better for field workers, along with Cesar Chavez. And I have to tell you, a short day for us in the fields was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That was a long day, bent over with a short-handled hoe, thinning beets or weeding cucumbers or whatever it was we were doing for that season. And Wayne was one of the people that really fought hard to make sure that the equity happened for workers that were forgotten and were not recognized. I can't thank Wayne enough for that. I know there were others in this chamber that did that, along with Wilma. And it's all right if I call you by your first name. We're buds, right? But, you know, it's those kinds of things, those profound changes where he made a difference, because it was really, really important to make a difference. And I don't think he ever thought in the terms of leaving a legacy. He made a difference because it was the right thing to do. God bless you, Wayne. Rest in peace.
Representative Linkert.
Madam Speaker, Representative Valdez, thank you for inviting us to say a few words on behalf of State Representative Wayne Knox. I served with Wayne for 2 years in this body, Representative Hansen, before being chosen by a vacancy committee to go over to the dark side. And Wayne was my mentor, he was my colleague, he was my friend, he was my weather vane. In fact, he was a weather vane for everybody in the House. Some folks knew which way to go by his vote, to go the opposite way, and some people knew to go the same way. But Wayne was always consistent. He was a man of integrity, a man of principle. He dedicated his life to improving lives for all Coloradans as a teacher, as a mentor, as a state representative for 32 years. When we visited him at the assisted living home, he had a table full of people, and he was still holding court and giving people advice on politics, and was mentally acute right until the end of his great 92 years. I visited Wayne at his home in Southwest Denver once, and Wayne's focus was his work, the state legislature and teaching. He had a couch, he had a chair, and a table, and that was about it. And the table was covered with bills, that he was reading. He was a model legislator. He read the bills, he stayed in his seat. He gave me a lot of advice, some of which I listened to speak sparingly, only when you absolutely need to, and briefly, something that I tried to follow, and some of the rest of us try to follow. So I miss Wayne, I miss him being here, I miss his example, and I just want to thank all of you for your service to the state. It's a big sacrifice that you're doing for these years that you're here. And Wayne provided a model for all of us to follow, and I hope that, that in your hearts and in your districts, you feel as strongly about this state as Wayne felt about this state, about his city, about his family, and about the people of Colorado. Thank you.
Are there any other former legislators who would like to speak? If not, the House will come back to order. The motion before us, did you actually move House? You did. The motion before us is the adoption of House Memorial 1001. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. I don't know why I said that. Those opposed say no. Okay, let's try that over again. All those in support say yes. All opposed say no. The motion is adopted. Representative Valdez.
Madam Speaker, I move that the current roll call of the House be added as co-sponsors.
If there's no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I would like to introduce the family that have joined us today in the chamber. We have Representative Knox's daughters, Laura Vossel and Lisa Knox, his stepson, Mark Gonzalez, and his grandson, Joshua Vossel. Thank you for coming today.
Members, our next order of business is consideration of resolutions, and Representative Buckner is going to take the chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The next order of business is consideration of resolutions. Mr. Randall, please read the title of HJR 1002.
House Joint Resolution 1002 by Representatives Melton and Harrod, also Senators Williams and Fields, concerning the commemoration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank you. Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to serve with you.
I'm not Madam Speaker. I'm Madam Speaker Pro Tem.
That's who you are.
But thank you.
Madam Speaker Buckner sounds good to me. And along with Madam Speaker Becker, of course. I move HJR 21002.
The motion before us is the adoption of HJR 1002. Is there any further discussion?
And I ask that it be read at length.
Is there any objection to, okay, we've read it at length, Mr. Randall. Thank you. Yes.
Whereas the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15, 1929, graduated from Morehouse College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1948, graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in 1951, and received a PhD from Boston University in 1955. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's faith, resiliency, and commitment to justice became known worldwide through his speeches, writings, and actions. And whereas Reverend Dr. King declared that the moral responsibility to aid the oppressed did not stop at the edge of his street, town, or state when he wrote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And whereas Reverend Dr. King withstood attacks on his home and family, among numerous other threats and setbacks, standing firm in his conviction that although the arc of the moral universe is long, it bends towards justice. And whereas Reverend Dr. King led the Montgomery bus boycott, a 13-month protest beginning in 1955 against the segregated city bus lines, and whereas the Montgomery bus boycott led to the integration of the Montgomery City bus system and is widely credited as the beginning of the civil rights movement in America, and whereas in 1957, Reverend Dr. King was elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization formed to provide leadership for the burgeoning civil rights movement, and whereas between 1957 and 1968, Reverend Dr. King spoke more than 2,500 times, wrote 5 books, as well as numerous articles, led protests, helped register African American voters, was arrested more than 20 times, was awarded 5 honorary degrees, was named Man of the Year by Time magazine, and became the symbolic leader of the African American community as well as a world figure. And whereas on August 28, 1963, Reverend Dr. King directed the March on Washington, wherein more than 200,000 Americans gathered in the name of equality and civil rights, and which culminated in Reverend Dr. King's historic I Have a Dream speech. And whereas the leadership of Reverend Dr. King was instrumental in bringing about landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public accommodations and facilities and banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which eliminated remaining legal barriers to voting for disenfranchised African American voters. And whereas in 1964, Reverend Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his tireless and selfless work in the pursuit of justice for African Americans and other oppressed people in America. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's 13 years of nonviolent leadership ended abruptly and tragically when on April 4th of 1968, he was assassinated while standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And whereas Reverend Dr. King's life and work continue to echo in our lives as we strive to reach the lofty goal when he said, "Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all of their scintillating beauty." And whereas Reverend Dr. King's birthday is a federal holiday in the United States and a state holiday in the state of Colorado, which is celebrated each year on the 3rd Monday in January, and whereas on Monday, January 20th, 2020, we celebrate the 34th anniversary of Reverend Dr. King's holiday, now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 72nd General Assembly of the State of Colorado, the Senate concurring herein, that we, the members of the Colorado General Assembly, hereby encourage appropriate observances, ceremonies, and activities to commemorate the federal and state legal holiday honoring the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout all cities, towns, counties, school districts, and local governments within the state of Colorado.
Thank you. Members, in order to get this joint resolution over to the Senate, we are going to take the formal vote on the adoption of this resolution now, which will allow it to be sent to the Senate so they can begin their discussion on this resolution. Then after voting, we will allow discussion from any members who wish to speak. The motion before us is the adoption of HJR 1002. Is there any further discussion? If there is any objection to taking, is there any objection to taking a voice vote on this motion? Seeing none, all of those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The resolution is adopted. Representative Herod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I move that the morning roll call be added as co-sponsors.
Seeing no objection, the current roll call will be added as co-sponsors. Representative Melton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. So today we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his tremendous contributions and dedication to civil rights and equality. His leadership was so greatly needed in the times that he lived because of all that led up to the civil rights movement. And his legacy is greatly needed today in our time when divisiveness is tearing us apart, a divisiveness that has in so many ways set us back, and a divisiveness that, if left unchecked, leaves our future uncertain. In so many ways, we are where we are because we made days like today routine and forgot how we got to this place. We ignore the pain of the past, but by doing so, we also open up future generations to new pain. Like the old adage, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So often when we think of Dr. King, instead of focusing on all that he talked about, we just focus on the hope. We focus on the I have a dream speech. But to fully honor Dr. King and his memory, we must understand that his I have a dream speech was part of a larger narrative. It was to address things that were rooted in injustice that took place centuries before. In fact, last year marked the 400th year that the first recorded slave ship arrived to this continent. Those injustices had and still have ramifications on many of us each and every day today. In order to achieve Dr. King's dream of equality, we must face facts and acknowledge that inequities in our society are real, and they do affect so many people. Dr. King once wrote that whenever the issue of compensatory or preferential treatment for the Negro is raised, some of our friends recoil in horror. The Negro should be granted equality, they agree, but should ask nothing more. On the surface, this appears to be reasonable, but it is not realistic. For it's obvious that if a man is entered into a race at the starting, or is entered at the starting line of a race 300 years after another man, the first would have to perform some impossible feat in order to catch up with his fellow runner. See, he understood that equality and equity are interlinked and go hand in hand. Without equity, equality is impossible to achieve, which leads to frustration and the said divisiveness that I mentioned earlier. A few years ago, I remember supporting a bill by the late Representative John Buckner. It was an education bill, and it was one that he was very passionate about as a former minority educator, and one that I was very passionate about as a former minority student. And the debate got really heated here on the floor. In fact, I saw John's resolve and his normal demeanor kind of unravel in a way that I've never seen. But we got through that debate, and shortly afterwards, another representative came to us and he asked the question, why is it black people are always so angry? My friend and colleague, Rep. Buckner, in his very John Buckner way, said that our journey has been a bit rougher than some others. You see, the reason why we were so passionate about the issue that we were discussing on the floor is because we're still trying to catch up in the race. I rarely quote entertainers and comedians, but there was a black comedian who put it best one time when he talked about his neighborhood. He said he is pretty successful in what he does. He's been in movies and television shows, and one of the people that lives in his neighborhood is Jay-Z, who's award-winning artist, one of the greatest rappers of all time. Another person in his neighborhood is Mary J. Blige, who's won Grammys and sold millions of records. And then he talked about his neighbor. His neighbor happens to be white, and he's a dentist. He's not the greatest dentist in the world. He's not an award-winning dentist. He's just a dentist. And he closed out that set saying that for some, sky's the limit. And for others, the limit is the sky. You see, I know that it's hard for some of us to hear things like that, but when we allow ourselves to come out of our comfort zones and we actually hear each other out, then we take on understanding instead of offense. And then divisiveness turns into unity. I know as a man, it makes me uncomfortable to hear that women earn less and yet have to pay a pink tax. But I need to hear it. I know that as a heterosexual, it doesn't make me feel good to hear about LGBTQ kids who are kicked out of their homes simply because of who they are. But I need to hear it. I know as a non-Hispanic person, it makes me uncomfortable to hear about families that are separated at the border, or about how they are hunted on both sides of that border. But I need to hear it. It's when we have understanding of each other and each other's struggles that we stop competing with one another and start helping one another. Then that's when the race that Dr. King talked about stops being a race and we end up just running together. So with that, members, I appreciate your support of this resolution.
Thank you. Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. At this time, we'd love to hear any remarks from members of this body in support of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. resolution and holiday.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, and thank you all for your attention. The Martin Luther King Jr. Library in Aurora opened up in the spring of 2004. This library sits in my House district on Colfax. For over 10 years, the library was missing something very, very important, and that was an actual representation of Dr. Martin Luther King. So about 5 years ago, one of our Aurora City Council members made it her work to see that there was going to be a statue. And on September of 2015, the library unveiled this incredibly beautiful 7-foot bronze sculpture in his honor. And of course, I had the privilege of standing in the snow and shivering with every one of my neighbors on that day. Obviously, I'm very proud to have that memorial in my House district. And some days, I drive down Colfax, and every time I do, I stop and I look and I acknowledge and I feel a sense, and this is real for me, I feel a sense of honor, and I feel a little bit more empowered to get through my day as I come here. Then I hoof it up to my office to make sure that I get up there before I have roll call. And I look around me. And many of you have been in my office and you've seen all these things, and some of you asked me about the things that sit in my office. And there are lots and lots of symbols. And for me, they're all about strength and they're all about determination. Y'all have seen that huge African warrior that sits behind me on my desk, on the wall. Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman in Congress and the first to seek the nomination for president. There's a Kachina doll made by the Hopi people. It's an eagle. It's a representation of courage. There is a picture of the Tuskegee Airmen. There is a statement on compassion from the Dalai Lama. There is a notorious RGB doll. And of course, there are several pictures of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Obviously, these archetypes that I have in my office offer me a great deal of comfort. And I very much appreciate all of our allies who have helped to battle injustices for African Americans and for all communities of color. And I think that it's very important for people with that kind of privilege to stand by our sides, because their voices too often have the most power. And the fact of the matter is, I really need that safe haven that I have in my office to do the work that I have to do in this building. Because that fight against oppression exists in so many ways still today. And it hurts. So it is imperative that we all work together for the betterment of the people of our entire state. And I, for one, am very grateful for Dr. King his legacy, and his work, because it forces all of us across the country to stop, to think about the impact that we have on other people's lives, and to acknowledge our roles in the continued pain of other people. And it gives us that opportunity to collectively continue to march towards unity. Thank you all for being in this fight with me.
Representative Neville, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. It's no secret that we all stand on shoulders of giants, and Dr. King was definitely one of those giants that we are standing on his shoulders today. I look at his life in general and how he relied on his faith to do some amazing things, and he ended up paying the ultimate sacrifice for what he believed in. That's something that I think that we can all admire. And I admire that he paid the price, but that I get to experience a lot of the fruits of what he was able to accomplish. I admire the fact that I can sit here and have big battles, policy battles in the well with Representative Herod and Representative Melton, but then I can have some of the best laughs with them outside of the chamber, or sit next to Representative Melton on Transportation Committee. We've had some of the best and greatest laughs. Yes, tuk-tuks, yes. I admire the fact that every time Madam Speaker Pro Tem here enters any room, she just lights up that room like anyone, like I've never seen before. She's just one of those lovely personalities to be around that just makes everything so much more positive when she shows up. I take a look at every time Representative Exum gives the morning prayer. I absolutely love it. It's just something that just gives me that encouraged faith that I have, that I can continue to walk in my walk with Jesus, and I know you share that same walk, and I just love it every time he gives the prayer. I look at the fact that I had the opportunity, and I really wanted to make sure that I went before Representative Coleman because he's an impossible act to follow, but that I had the opportunity to get baptized in the Jordan where Jesus Christ himself was baptized with my wife and I, and got to share that moment with Representative Coleman. And a lot of this is because of the work that Dr. King did. So like I said, it's no secret that we stand on the shoulders of giants. He was one of those giants. God bless Dr. King, and God bless his memory.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Representative Exum.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. I just want to read a few excerpts from a couple of things that Dr. King stated. But before I read that, I think I shared last year, my sophomore year in high school was 1968. And I had an opportunity to give a speech about Dr. King. And I remember being so nervous, probably one of the first times I ever spoke in front of the class. And then a few months after I gave that speech, he was assassinated. There's a couple of things that speaks to my heart today. He said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. He who passionately accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who accepts and penetrates it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. Morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. Judicial decrees may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. Hatred paralyzes life. Love releases it. Hatred confuses life. Love harmonizes it. Hatred darkens life, but love illuminates it. God bless you, and God bless Dr. King.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to take a brief moment for some quick remarks. You know, we live in a great nation that was founded by some extraordinary people about 240 years ago, but they wrote some great words on a document that is the foundation of this very country. But before the ink was dry, we'd already fallen short of the promise. And in many ways, you can view the interceding 240 years as, I know the quote has already been read over, but it is one of my favorites, but as our journey on that moral arc, bending toward justice and to live up to the ideals that were set forth in the founding document. We've had a lot of fights over it, and Dr. Martin Luther King was the embodiment in the contemporary era of that struggle and of that bend. So I'm just so grateful that we have a day where not only we can look back and reflect on the truly extraordinary man that Martin Luther King was, but also be reminded that the struggle continues and that we have made progress. We've come a long way in 240 years, and we still have a long way to go in realizing that ideal, but that we are all on this path together, and we are all searching for that ideal that I don't think we'll ever hit, but we will get closer and get better, and the next generation will hopefully enjoy a little bit more justice than we did, and hopefully that will continue, and Dr. Martin Luther King is absolutely a bright point on that history. So with that, you know, this is a great day. I urge us all on Monday to take some time to really reflect on what Martin Luther King meant and what that journey means. So thank you.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. You know, members, I just wanted to start by briefly underscoring a little bit about what my colleague from Aurora spoke about. It really was a work of years to bring the statue of Dr. King to the library named after him, and I was also there at the unveiling. And the way that Aurora marks the holiday is we lay a wreath at the statue very early in the morning, and then there's a procession, you know, down the road, and we join the Marade gathering at City Park and go from there. And you know, these are open, and let me just extend an invitation from all of us in Aurora if you'd like to join us early Monday morning, 7:30 thereabouts. We're there if it's 40 degrees and sunny. We're there if it's 20 degrees and blowing snow, and it's been each of those in the last number of years. Elected officials and others gather from whatever office, whatever party, to pay our respects there. If you can't make it Monday, if you're driving down Colfax by Fletcher Plaza sometime, stop and just reflect for a moment. There was quite a contest to find the rare artist who could do justice to Dr. King, and it's a beautiful rendering, and it's a good place to stop and reflect. But what I wanted to share was some words from Dr. King's Nobel acceptance speech, and this was given in Oslo, December of 1964. So, beginning the quote, "I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him. I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality." He continues, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, equality and freedom for their spirits. I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, other-centered men can build up." And he continues, "This faith can give us courage to face the uncertainties of the future. It will give our tired feet new strength as we continue our forward stride toward the city of freedom. When our days become dreary with low hovering clouds and our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, we will know that we are living in the creative turmoil of a genuine civilization struggling to be born." The whole speech is actually not very long. It's worth going and finding online and reading in full. As probably with everything that he wrote, there is a force in very few words from Dr. King that transcends what most of us could ever do. So what I thought that means for us is that today, years later, there are people in our state and country who face the despair that Dr. King spoke of and who stare into that starless midnight. So I think that we as public servants ought to have the audacity to believe that we can do something about that. That in a country of vast wealth, we can end hunger. That in a country of vast learning, we can improve education. And that in a nation whose first self-evident truth written down in that document that my colleague spoke of in 1776, that whose first self-evident truth is that all men and women are created equal, we can identify and root out the root causes of persistent inequality almost 250 years later. And finally, that we have faith that those who would build up can outpace those who would tear down. So I think if we keep to that audacious faith that Dr. King spoke of, that is how we here honor his work and his legacy. Thank you.
Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Martin Luther King transcended so many standards. As a leader of our country at a critical time when he called on us to change, he issued an indictment of where we had fallen short on our most fundamental values. Not an indictment of the moment, an indictment of our failure for hundreds of years to live up to our principles. He was a preacher on the pulpit who called us to recognize where we had fallen short. And that indictment in our hearts, in how we dealt with our fellow citizens, also called upon us to change. And as somebody who believes strongly in our constitutional principles, what has always struck me in reading his speeches and how he approached this great life's work is his fundamental belief in the U.S. Constitution that we as citizens are heir to. And in his I Have a Dream speech on the Washington Memorial, he said, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to every American who was heir to those promises. And that really is what he was calling for, right? I mean, he was called a radical in his time, but what is radical about insisting that a country, its system of government, its institutions, its people, live up to our most fundamental constitutional values? That's not radical, that's just right. And way overdue. And it is interesting, the day before he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, he had shown up to support sanitation workers doing a strike and was going to fight the injunction that had been issued against that. And so they were involved in a court action saying that the injunction was unconstitutional, unwarranted. And it struck me also how he, in this work of his, took on both the specific situations as well as the huge transformative. It was his influence with LBJ, and a very interesting history lesson that led to the passage of some of the most transformative civil rights laws in our country. He was involved in that fight at that level, but he also showed up for a specific situation involving a fairly small number of workers in Tennessee to confront what he thought in that specific situation was an unconstitutional infringement upon their rights that he was going to protest and take a stance against. And he made the "I've been to a mountaintop" speech in Memphis on April 3rd, 1968, the day before he was assassinated. And he talked about nice words versus living up to it. And he said to those in Memphis and to the country, "Be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they hadn't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of the press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest and to insist on your rights." And that's what we're doing in Memphis, Tennessee. And members, when we do legislation, we are trying to realize in our time the realization, to make real those principles. And that is a challenge. There's different views on how those principles should apply, but that is part of our great work, which is such a privilege to do for our citizens. So I rise in strong support of this resolution.
Thank you, Representative Carver. Representative Benavides.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Members, you know, as we discuss the legacy of Martin Luther King, and hearing the speakers before me, I think one of the quotes that I don't remember which person mentioned, but was that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice, and injustice, I always get them wrong, anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And you know, that is so important because it reminded me again of this past weekend. I met with a group of constituents, a group of stakeholders. They have formed last year something they called an Enough Coalition. And they went around the room and they asked everybody, what was enough for you to think this was important enough? And when I got up and spoke, I said, you know what was enough for me was last year, and I think the representative from Aurora mentioned this, was the children in cages. That is under our watch in this country. It's based on a policy that is unfair. But if we can let the treatment of the most vulnerable people among us happen that way and not stand up, it's problematic. It's also, the other thing that was enough for me was the rise in hate crimes. In 2017, we had the highest number of hate crimes in this country, 7,175. 2018, we had 7,120. That's nationally, and that was roughly 2,000 more than 2016. In Colorado, in 2018, we had a 16% increase in hate crimes. And the targets of these hate crimes are Latinos, they're blacks, they're Muslims, they're LGBTQ, they're women, they're people of faith, Jewish people. This is occurring every day in our communities. You know, in El Paso, someone went in and killed 22 people in the matter of minutes and injured 24. These things are going on every day around us. And to me, that was my enough. That everything we do in this house, I hope, will be to get rid of that, to say we cannot stand for that. You know, I think it's important that we honor the work of Representative Wilma Webb, who's here with us, that really year after year, and her tireless efforts to get this made a holiday cannot be overlooked. And she was able to point out what was going on in this country, in this state, in order to get this holiday adopted. It wasn't an automatic thing where everybody all of a sudden decided we should do this. I think other members have said that when King was around, he was not welcomed. He was thought of as an extremist, and his views were. So it takes time, I recognize that. But more than ever, for many of us, this is the time that we need to embrace Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. We need to embrace his cry for equality, his cry for tolerance. You know, I have walked in the MLK parade nearly every year since 1985, and I'll be there again this year. And I would hope that many of you, if you've never done it, that you go out there and join it. It is one time when people of all colors, all backgrounds, get together and show that what Martin Luther King stood for was important. So I thank the Black Caucus for bringing this and encourage all of you to go on Monday. Thank you.
Representative Holtorf, welcome.
Fellow representatives, we all have been touched by Martin Luther King in one way or another. And I was touched when I was in college in the I Have a Dream speech that Martin Luther King gave in August 28th of 1963. And there's one specific paragraph that touched me more than any other paragraphs, although they were all very important. Don't quote me on the number, I think it was paragraph 19. It's a very short paragraph, I'll read it. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, by the content of their character. And I will tell you that word character hit me like a sabot round out of an M1 Abrams. I'm a military guy, so I tend to remember those analogies. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lip dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and little white girls as sisters and brothers. I spent some of my time in the military in Fort Rucker, Alabama. Actually, 2 different rotations through that military installation in the 90s. And I will tell you that I was able to walk hand in hand with my African American friends. I went and served with them, participated in flight school, and went on to follow on military assignments with them, and served with pride and dignity. But I want to focus on the word character. We need to think about character, and we need to lead to build character in our youth, in ourselves, in our state. If we build character in our future generations, many of these things that are inflicted on our society, many of these things that cripple our families and our communities, many of these bad things that happen, interracial conflict, many of these things, they magically will go away because we'll have the character that Martin Luther King spoke of. I want to remind us all here that we're Americans. We're Americans first. In the military, when you go to a combat zone, all of a sudden your ethnicity doesn't matter anymore because there's something much greater at stake. It's called your life and the life of your fellow brothers and sisters in arms. You don't care. You don't care. It doesn't matter. And that's something I will never forget in serving my country and serving with all ethnicities. I would extend this dream to all ethnicities and to all Americans. It doesn't matter. We're Americans. If we think about being Americans first, and we wash away the rest of it, things change in our perspective. And I promoted this quietly for a great deal of my life, but now I'm promoting it publicly in front of this esteemed delegation. So let's walk hand in hand to be Americans, be Coloradoans, and keep America the greatest nation on earth. Because make no mistake about it, Martin Luther King was able to do what he did, and God bless him for what he did, because of this country. Because in many countries that I've been to, my friend Pratik has been to, you can't even begin to have these liberties. The injustices that they experience are so much greater and so more horrific than anything we know in this country that it makes you unable to sleep at night. And when you come back to this country and you realize how wonderful this country is and how great this nation is, and just the assembly that we have here today, what we're able to do hand in hand and talk is amazing. Because in many places in the world, the conversation begins and it ends with an AK-47 at the back of your head, and the trigger gets moved to the rear position. And that ends the conversation. And so those of us who have served overseas in the Middle East, we understand that. So I thank you for your time and listening to me. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I move to adopt the resolution as well, or support the adoption of the resolution as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Holtorf. Representative Kipp.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Hey, I wasn't planning to talk today, but I did recognize, I think, that there's one small piece of the conversation that we're missing today. And that is, in these times, even as we think every day that we have come to a better place with more equality, Martin Luther King Day means to me people being equal, people being held equally, and making sure that we all have the same set of rights. And the piece that I think is missing is we haven't really talked much about allies, because allies in the work of the brave people who have come before us and fought for equality in equal rights, so many times that work has fallen on those who are fighting for those rights for themselves. But we all have to be willing to stand up and fight for the rights of others, no matter the color of your skin, who you are, who you love, who you worship, where you were born, or any other defining characteristic about you. I just want you all to know that you have an ally in me, and I know that most of you are good human beings, and I know that you will fight for the rights of others. And I ask you to join me in standing up for the rights of those who are not as fortunate as you to have the voice that you do in this chamber. Thank you.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. We all judge, but we should judge people based on the content of their heart and not the color of their skin. That comes from Dr. Martin Luther King, but it should resonate with all of us. Last year, I stood in this very place, and I shared a very personal story, which hopefully all of you remember. Coming from a tied election when I was a student, my opponent was an African-American man. We decided to share the office. And one thing that he had wanted to fight for was to get Martin Luther King Jr. Day off as a university holiday. We got it off because we were successful. However, we weren't successful because instead of thinking about Dr. King and what he stood for, we noticed a lot of students took the day off to go skiing. We then pushed the following year to actually have the I Have a Dream speech read at length, and to this day that celebration continues. I wanted to share with you also today that, as you know, I was born and raised in Delta. We don't have a lot of African Americans in Delta. We have a lot of Hispanics, but not so many African Americans. And it wasn't until college that changed a little bit. However, I can remember my dad telling me a story. They had lived briefly when he was young in Texas. And he said, even as a young man, he always thought it was odd that there were 2 drinking fountains. He thought it was odd that they got to go ahead of certain people, and he didn't know why. And he said it was expected that they should have a nanny, and she was African American. And he said he never understood that because he was so young. But that shows the innocence of a child realizing that something is wrong with this picture. That's a historic picture, but it shows just how it resonates from one generation to another. You don't necessarily have to have lived it firsthand to be able to say that was wrong. And that's why we need to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and to celebrate his legacy, because we shall never forget what was done that was wrong, and we shall never repeat that. And to move closer, as that arc moves. So thank you very much for bringing this resolution, and I stand here in strong support of it.
Thank you, Representative Soper. Representative Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Just wanted to take a moment of privilege. We're celebrating Dr. King as a whole, but I also wanted to recognize someone who's here today, and there's many to be recognized, but I wanted to do that in the context of talking about the MLK Holiday Commission. And so the purpose of this statewide Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Holiday Commission is to unify and educate communities within the state of Colorado and encourage appropriate observations, ceremonies, and activities in commemoration of the federal holiday and state legal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout all towns, cities, schools, districts, counties, and local governments within Colorado, including Loveland, Grand Junction, Boulder, Greeley, Fort Collins, and many other places across the state. Countless events are held, including a youth summit, interfaith services, the Humanitarian and Lifetime Achievement Awards, and a Free Colorado Symphony Orchestra concert. This year, the 35th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Parade and the MLK Jr. African American Heritage Rodeo of Champions, just to name a few. The term parade was coined by the Honorable former First Lady of Denver, Wilma Webb, who fought in the Colorado legislature to have Dr. King's birthday recognized as a Colorado state holiday. Representative Webb's efforts came to fruition on April 4th, 1985, as then Colorado's Governor Dick Lamb signed the legislation into law. And in 1986, Webb announced that Denver would have a one-of-a-kind march and a parade called a parade. There are many people who make the impact of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Colorado Holiday Commission possible today, including Dr. Terry Nelson, Dr. Barbara Shannon Bannister, and many others. I'd like to make special recognition of Dr. Vern Howard, who has led the parade, if you wouldn't mind standing, please, who has led the parade since 1998 and has been working with the commission since he was in high school before the holiday was passed. Dr. Howard, thank you for all that you've done and continue to do. Because of you, I am blessed to serve, along with others who are mentioned today, our communities as a state legislator, as well as many others who are making a positive impact in the lives of Coloradans across our great state. Please join me in a round of applause for Dr. Vern Howard.
Representative Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. Members, I know we have a few more people who would like to speak, but I want to come down here and first thank all of my colleagues for saying their words in relation to this holiday, in relation to the work that we do here. Mr. Minority Leader Neville, I very much respect your respect of Dr. King and so many of our African American legends. I know you keep them in your heart when you're doing the work that you do. One thing that we forget about in this body is that we're all here to do a job and to represent the people of our districts and the people of Colorado well. I think when we hold Dr. King's words in our hearts, we can do that. with the character that the people of Colorado deserve from us. I think both sides of the aisle embody that. Not just Democrats, not just Republicans, all of us. In the beginning of these sessions, we always start with MLK Day. It's one of our biggest days for our first speeches where we kind of work out our nerves, right? And see how it feels to be at the well again. And we say these great words about how we're going to work together and come together for the people of Colorado. I believe most of us mean them when we say them, and I think we need to be reminded of them throughout the session, especially during the budget and towards the end. But what we need to always remember that we have to do is to stay down here and fight for the people of Colorado, regardless of what our views are. Dr. King is often attributed with a quote, "Our lives begin to end the days that we become silent about the things that matter." He was not the originator of this quote. But his body, his life embodies this quote so much that it's been attributed to him. And I know why. Members, we did not come down here to be silent about the things that matter. And as my colleagues have mentioned a few things, I will not be silent about them either. So when we come here to the General Assembly to fight, we must fight for the things that matter. That means we must continue to fight for equality for all of Coloradans and people throughout this country. We must fight when we see families being separated at the border and kids being put in cages. We must fight, and we must not be silent. We cannot be silent when Black and brown men are shot in the back because their very skin color was seen as a threat to someone. We cannot be silent as the opioid crisis continues to leave people dead on the streets when what they really needed was treatment. We cannot remain silent when our educational achievement gap of Black and brown young men and women and boys and girls continues to grow. We cannot remain silent when families are being pushed out of our historic communities because housing is just unaffordable. We cannot remain silent when our LGBTQ students are choosing suicide over bullying, where young Black girls, their braids are getting pulled out of their hair because it's deemed unkept or different. Members, we cannot continue to be silent when people are dying because they cannot afford health care, when mass incarceration is still alive, and when rural Colorado feels disconnected from the work of this body. We cannot remain silent when the climate crisis is not only impacting those in urban areas like Denver, but in our rural communities across Colorado. And we cannot remain silent when the threat of war looms to tear apart the limbs of our very family members who have stood up and chosen to serve this country. Members, I will not be silent in this body. Few of you are surprised. When I hear of injustice that is happening right in this well or across the state of Colorado. House District 8 has historically been represented by strong women, majority strong Black women. I have learned not to be silent because my predecessor, Wilma Webb, was not silent. She stood against attacks against her family, her person, and her position right here in this body to fight for the recognition of the MLK holiday for years. I will not remain silent while she stands watching over this seat to ensure that we continue to fight for justice. Wilma Webb, we owe you a debt of gratitude for you standing up, remaining unsilent, and fighting for the people of Colorado. Thank you, Wilma. Members, while we may not agree on everything, we may not agree on a lot, I will stand with you when you are standing for justice, regardless of the party. And when I falter in that, I ask that you tap me on the shoulder and remind me of the words of Dr. King, and ensure that our character rises above the inner conflict that may happen within this chamber, and that we continue to fight for the people of Colorado. Thank you.
Speaker Pro Tem Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Melton and I didn't talk about what our comments were going to be today, and it's amazing that we were on the same page when it came to economic justice and Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King knew that ending racial segregation was necessary, but he also had another component of his legacy. He was also known for his advocacy for economic justice. He knew that desegregation was necessary, but that it could only go so far if an individual could still be denied a bank loan for a housing opportunity or other economic opportunities, be denied that because of their race. An article in The Atlantis highlighted how Dr. King's work with the Poor People's Campaign included advocacy for federal funding for full employment, a guaranteed annual income, anti-poverty programs, and housing for the poor. The reason I'm telling you this is because you know I'm a storyteller, and I am not afraid to share stories with all of you that impacted my life and still impact my life today. I'm going to have a photo of the house that I grew up in put up there. Back in the late 50s, almost 60, so you don't know how old I am, my parents always referred to Dr. Martin Luther King and how he wanted all people to live their best lives. Well, my family wanted a better life for me and my brother and my sister. They wanted us to have a house that had an indoor bathroom. Yeah, I grew up in a house that did not have indoor plumbing. My mother wallpapered our bathroom so it would be acceptable. She even put a little lamp out there so it would look like other people's houses. I had a little flashlight, so when I went to the bathroom at night, got my flashlight out, and I went to the outhouse. And I'm not ashamed to tell you that because it's part of who I am. My parents wanted a better life, and they wanted us to live like the other people in this little town of Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Well, my parents decided to look for a house, but unfortunately in the town where I grew up, you could only purchase a house in certain parts of the town. Well, doggone it, the town wasn't that big, so there weren't that many choices. And the choices that we were offered were unacceptable, and they were not an upgrade. So my parents said, you know what, Janet, there's always a solution to every problem. We bought a lot that most people didn't see as a jewel, but my parents saw so much opportunity in this little lot that we bought. And I remember helping my parents clear this lot because it had so many trees on it, had lots of snakes, a lot of junk, but we cleared this lot and my parents paid cash for the lot. Well, the next thing we needed to do was build a house. My parents were savers. They had the most amazing work ethic you've ever heard of. They saved money, had enough money to go to the bank to get a loan for a house. Well, unfortunately, they were turned down. My parents were creditworthy, hard workers, model citizens. Everybody in this town knew who we were. So I remember having this conversation later on when I was a little bit older, and I thought to myself, how could they turn you down for a bank loan? Everybody knows where we live. Everybody knows that we're model citizens. Well, after several times of being turned down for a loan, my parents went to some people, some white families that we worked for, and these white families were appalled because they knew what amazing people we were, that we were good people. One of the families was Jim and Leona Macy. He was a prefab home builder. My mother was their cleaning lady. She told him what happened, and he said, Liz, we're gonna find a way for you to get a house. We also went to another family that we worked for. Their last name was Hag. In fact, their daughter's coming to town next week, and I'm going to have brunch with her because we are still friends. Her family helped us come up with a solution to get a mortgage. The other family who helped us was a family called the Lorries. They said, this is ridiculous. They even went to the bank for my family, but we were still denied the loan. Well, these families got creative and figured out a way for us to buy this house and to build that house. That's me on the right side, sitting in that chair, and that's my mother, Mary Elizabeth, over on the left, and that's my dog, Lady. You know, that was a really nice house. It had 2 bedrooms, and it had an indoor bathroom, and I went to that house when I entered 1st grade. I'm telling you this because this is a part of who I am. I have this framed, and everybody that comes to my house sees this picture because I am so proud of what my family did to get us into a beautiful home. My mother was an immaculate housekeeper and a homemaker, and I want everyone to know where I came from and what it took to get there, because there's no turning back when you're determined. We can always find a way. When I look at that, it just gives me so much pride that my parents did not give up because they could have. Here's what's so frustrating. According to Forbes magazine, a recent analysis from Zillow shows that in 2016, just 4 years ago, nearly 21% of Black applicants were denied a conventional loan. Sounds familiar. 15.5% of Hispanics were denied loans. Forbes magazine also found that Black homebuyers were denied mortgages more than twice as often as whites. So I'm telling you this story to tell you that back in 1956 this happened, and it's unfortunately still happening today. While my situation ended in a positive manner, we shouldn't have to rely on charity and favors to achieve economic justice. As a society, we must recognize the connection between racial injustice and economic injustice and work with each other to connect and correct these structural inequities. When we see economic injustice and racial injustice, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us to do something about it. Please take that message with you. It is incumbent upon all of us to do something about it. And this little girl from Lawrenceburg, Indiana, who grew up in a house with no indoor bathroom, I think I did pretty well. I live in a beautiful home, and that's why I show my grandkids this picture of where I grew up. Yes, it was little, but my parents owned it lock, stock, and barrel. And they were so proud, and I'm still so proud of them. So thanks for listening to my stories. I've told lots of stories here, but I have had so many incidences in my life that have just made me stronger. So, you know, I say this all the time, but it's the truth. I love all of you. I feel that I have a special connection with every one of you on this side and this side. And even though we may have differences, there's always a way for us to find similarities in our lives. So thanks for listening to my story, and I hope you will remember Janet Thomas back in the day with her mother, her dog Lady, and my father who helped us build that house. Thank you so much.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is my 8th time to be here for one of these. And Representative Singer, this is going to be one of those what now deals, okay? For those of you that don't know what those are, we do these resolutions and we say all these things, and I get up here and say, what now? You gonna be up here again next year doing the same thing? It amazes me how much more alike we are than we are different, because Madam Speaker Pro Tem, wherever she went, there she is, we could probably have a photo op, because we had a 2-hole privy where I grew up on the farm. We didn't have indoor plumbing either. I'm actually one of the rare members in this house today that was in college during the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and was in education and helped break up a race riot in my high school. Been there and done that a little bit. My college suite mates, as I think I told the story last year, were named Fast Eddie and Big Daddy, both black athletes. I just thought they were athletic brothers. Representative Soper, if you think there's not much diversity in Delta, you ought to see Kiowa, Kansas, okay? No diversity, and there I am in college, and I'm suite mates with these guys, and I just think they're just people like me. You know, I'm young and ignorant and didn't know any better. But I still don't think they're any different than I am. The thing that we do today, and the thing that we've done every year for 8 years, is that we quote Martin Luther King, and we make speeches about what he said and what he did and what he stood for, and then I watch as we really don't do what we talk about today. For 8 years, we don't. Now, I also mentioned, I think last year, Martin Luther King was not perfect. I hate to break that to you. He wasn't perfect, just like the rest of us. But what do we celebrate? The good in the man. Isn't that something we need today? To celebrate the good in each and one of us instead of criticize those things in which we fall short. So what now? What now? The solution's pretty simple. Love one another. Doesn't get any more simple than that. Doesn't get any more simple. I love you, colleagues. I have to admit, some more than others, but that's okay. But I want you to know, I'm proud to be one of the James brothers. And for those of you that don't know what that is, Representative Coleman and I are the only 2 James in the chamber. And on our first bill, we superimposed our faces over the James brothers and handed that out to the committee, and we've just kind of been the James brothers since. How many of you in this chamber remember what it was like to grow up with brothers and sisters? Did you all get along all the time? Did you all look alike? You fought like cats and dogs, folks. I mean, sometimes literally. And I hate to admit it, my brother's no longer with me, but I threatened to hit him in the head with a hay hook one time while we were hauling hay. He just ticked me off. And he was smart enough not to crawl back up on the back of the truck. All we got to do is love one another. So we look different. Representative Coleman and I look a little different, if you haven't noticed. But we can fight over issues, we can be on opposite sides of the issue, and we can still love one another. Here's the news flash, folks. He and I both have the same father. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. When we're up here with brothers and sisters, don't forget that. We don't have to make long speeches and so on and so forth. We just have to remember that when the chips are down, blood is thicker than water. And that's where we should stand. Why don't we just act totally as family members instead of making these great speeches and then next year come back and make the same speeches and we haven't learned to love our brothers and sisters? I hope next year that there'll be a lot more family members down here at this well. Thank you.
Representative Milton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I again want to thank all the members for speaking on this resolution. Like Representative Wilson, this is my 8th year down here, and this is the last time I will have carried this resolution. I've carried it almost every year I've been here. I think I gave it up a couple times. But the reason why I've always wanted to be on this resolution is because growing up, I grew up here in the metro area, and I grew up listening to KDKO. And at the beginning of every hour, KDKO would play a Martin Luther King speech, a little clip. And one that really hit me growing up was, be the best that you could be at whatever it is that you're gonna do. Whether you're gonna be a street sweeper, be the best street sweeper you could be. And so I've always tried to live my life by that. And so because of that, and that being such a big influence in my life, I've always wanted to make sure that we've gotten this resolution done and done right. And I agree with Representative Herod. It's so good to see that coming from both sides of the aisle. So thank you again for supporting this resolution, and let's have a good year.
Members, we've already moved the motion, so at this point, if there's no one else that wants to speak, then we'll be going into announcements and introductions. Announcements and introductions, yes. Representative Soper.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to come down here and introduce a constituent of mine, but he's not just any constituent. He's a high school environmental sciences teacher. Ben Graves, if you'll please stand. He was selected in 2018 as National Geographic's Grosvenor Teaching Fellow and traveled 70 degrees north of the Northwest Passage in the Arctic of Canada to study the changing environment there. He has brought something very unique to Delta and Delta County schools, and that's that he's teaching hands-on experiences to students to learn how to be certified solar installers. He's brought over 50 kilowatts of solar capacity to Delta County schools, and he's inspired dozens and dozens of students. His exemplary teaching and something that has been highlighted, it's just a real honor to have you down here because I come from a family of teachers, and no matter what you teach, you're inspiring the next generation of Coloradans, and it's more valuable than the work we do down here. It's more valuable than NFL players. So thank you, teacher, and I just want to thank Ben Graves for coming down here today.
Representative Singer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Senate has already adjourned, and so the Colorado Channel Authority Board will be meeting in 6 minutes in honor of House District 11 at 11:11 a.m.
Representative Liston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, I'm not here to do what you think I'm going to say. I just wanted to, I got you there, I always keep you off balance. I wanted to give a special shout out to my lovely wife. This weekend, we will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. She is an amazing lady and woman, very accomplished. And if you all think you have a hard time putting up with me from one session to another, just think what she's had to go through over the last 40 years. But my lovely wife, Marianne, we will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary this Sunday. So God bless her, and I will see you all next week. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Representative Liston. I think there are no more announcements and introductions, so at this point, we will read reports of committees of reference. Mr. Randall.
Committee on State Veterans and Military Affairs, after consideration of the merits of the committee, is following House Bill 1021 be referred to the committee hold favorable recommendation. House Bill 1036 be referred to the committee hold favorable recommendation. House Bill 1051 be referred to the committee of the whole favorable recommendation.
Printing report.
Chief Clerk.
Printing report be printed in the journal. Message from the Senate.
Madam Speaker, the Senate has adopted House Joint Memorial 1002 and returns it herewith.
And Majority Leader or Assistant Majority Leader Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the House stand in recess until later today.
Seeing no objection, the House will be in recess till later today.